Good morning, everybody. Thanks again for joining today's Green Business Fund webinar. We'll be looking at energy efficiency in office-based organisations. Just a couple of things before we get started. If you have any questions at any point, you can type these into the questions pane of your control panel. You should be able to see that on the right-hand side of your screen. Type these in at any time and we'll do our best to address them in the Q&A session at the end. Also, we will be sending around the slides after today's webinar, so don't worry too much about scribbling down notes. It'll also be recorded and available to view in full on YouTube in the coming days as well. So just before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Annie Osborne. I'm the Green Business Fund Coordinator at the Carbon Trust, and I've been with the organisation for just over a year now. For those of you that don't know very much about the Carbon Trust, just a quick background. Our mission is to accelerate the move to a sustainable low carbon economy. And the way we do that is through our three main areas of work, which are advice, and this includes things like today's webinar. We advise businesses, governments and the public sector. We also work in footprinting, measuring and certifying environmental footprint of different organisations, products and services, and technology. So we help develop and deploy new innovative low carbon technologies and solutions. And we're an environmental consultancy and we're a not-for-profit organisation. So in terms of today's webinar, these are the areas that we're going to be looking at. We'll start with a bit of a background on energy consumption in office buildings, and then we'll go into some of the specific areas, including lighting, heating, ventilation and air conditioning, office equipment, good housekeeping and the people solutions, as well as going through your next steps and the support that is available. So this is just quite a helpful graph that shows you that for typical businesses, it depends on the sector that you're in, but energy costs can be up to about 30% of your business running costs. Just have a think about if you could reduce that 30%, what sort of opportunities that might create for your organisation if that was freed up. And hopefully we'll have a look today at some of the areas that can help reduce that. So here are just a quick overview of some of the key areas of energy consumption in offices and some of the opportunities that we'll be exploring. So predominantly lighting, and we'll have a look at different switching off policies and how you can get that to be a habit for your organisation. Heating and cooling, maintenance, office equipment and refurbishment and replacement, as well as controls for different energy uses. So we'll start with lighting. For a lot of organisations, this is maybe the most obvious energy spend, and it can be quite a large one as well. There can be significant cost savings through considering your equipment, maintenance and staff habits. And we just have a look at some of the simple and inexpensive ways to reduce your energy consumption from lighting. So in the first instance, having a switch off policy, it's important that staff are involved in this and awareness is increased. Labelling light switches is a big part of that. If you see on the left hand side, these are some examples of some free stickers that you can download from the Carbon Trust website and put around your office. A lot of the time people might be apprehensive about what they're allowed to switch off, what they're meant to leave on, so obviously labelling things really clearly is a good way of addressing that. Avoiding blinds down and lights on, so these are just some sort of general things to make your staff aware of, and maintenance of the lighting itself. We'll touch on that a little bit later on as well. So for the lighting that you already have, you may be able to reduce or remove the unnecessary lighting. If you see the picture on the right hand side, this shows some lighting which is quite clearly poorly positioned. You're really lighting the top of those cupboards, which doesn't need to be done at all. A solution for this could be, it's fairly easy to move blocks of lights like that. You could move them further into the center of the room so the light is actually doing what it should be. Or you could think of switching them off completely, so at least you're not wasting the energy lighting areas that don't need to be done. Also making use of the natural daylight, avoiding obstructions in front of windows, and as we said, removing the excess lamps. A good example of this is we carried out an energy assessment in a school, and the school had noticed that they were spending quite a lot of money on their lighting, and the energy use was really high, even though they'd replaced lighting with LED. And they didn't know why it was so high until they realized that one of the classrooms in the school had a false ceiling installed, and above that false ceiling there was still light bulbs which not only were still installed, but they were on. So they'd been on for 10 years constantly. No one had noticed because it was hidden above the ceiling of the school, and obviously wasting a lot of energy. So once they could reduce that, take out all those lights and not have them on all the time, they saw significant savings. It's just something to bear in mind, particularly if your organisation is moving to a new site. If you don't know what's already there, it's really worth checking what specific lighting is installed at the moment, and if this is suitable. So in terms of LEDs, if you are able to replace the lighting in your offices, LED is the best way to go. They are more expensive in the short term in terms of buying the new LED lighting and replacing, but over the lifespan of the lights, it is much cheaper. And we'll have a look at a little example of that in a second. The box on the right hand side shows some of the benefits, including the reduced environmental impact, instant on of the lights, and the durability. We have a free lighting guide which is available on our website. That's a really good place to look if you want a bit more specific information about the different types of lighting you might currently have, and how best to switch this over. You can download that from the website for free. So as this case study shows, an example of switching from halogen spotlights to the LED replacement. So as you can see, for the bulb cost itself, the halogen spotlight was £2, the LED version is £5, so a little bit more expensive. But then when you have a look at what the projected lifespan of the halogen version compared to the LED version, the LED one is going to last over 10 times as long. It's going to use 10 times less kilowatt hours of electricity, and it will cost, the cost of electricity will be £18 for the LED compared to £180 for the halogen version. And in terms of the total cost of buying and running the bulb, for the halogen one, you're looking at £204 compared to the LED one, which is just £23. So for most organisations, if you can make that initial investment to switching your lights to LED, you'll start seeing that payback in your energy savings in a year, typically a year or two. So it is worthwhile if that is a possibility. Another thing that's useful to have a look at is the controls of your lighting. So things like occupancy sensors in your offices, this is really helpful. It stops you having to rely on employees remembering to turn lights off. It reduces that human error aspect. Things like PIR, passive infrared sensors, sense when people are around and turn off the lights when no one is there. So for example, in our Carbon Trust offices here in London, we have an open plan office, and on some days, if for example a lot of people are out at client meetings or events, the office might not be full. and the areas where people aren't sitting, the lights will switch off, so they're not unnecessarily lighting the whole office when you don't need to. It's also quite helpful for things like meeting rooms, which might be only used infrequently, corridors as well, toilets, things like storerooms, which obviously probably don't need the lights on for very much of the day at all. Another thing to think about is daylight sensors. So quite often offices end up being overlit, especially on a sunny day. You don't necessarily need your lighting on at all or not on as bright. And daylight sensors can sense what the lux levels are in the office and either turn off or reduce the lighting if there is sufficient daylight. Obviously you need to be able to see properly in your office, but a lot of the time it's ends up being far too bright and people don't think about turning the lights off even when it is really bright outside. And just another note in terms of lights which are right next to windows, they're obvious ones that can be switched off if it is a sunny day. You don't need those lights that are right next to the windows because they're probably not adding anything anyway. So we'll now quickly have a look at heating, ventilation and air conditioning, or HVAC. So for typical organisations, heating for your organisation can account for between 20% and 40% of the total energy costs, so from that dark blue to the light blue section. And in terms of savings that this creates, typically around a third of your energy costs can be saved from improving your heating and reducing energy costs. So some things that are just highlighted at the bottom on this slide are obtaining feedback from your staff. It's important, obviously, that all the people working in your office are comfortable. It might be that different areas of the office are heated in different ways. You might find that one section, people are always too hot, they're always opening the windows and the heating's blasting out. Other areas might be much too cold, so it's worth checking with your staff to see what the case is at the moment, and having a walk around your office to look for any obvious issues there. Another thing is matching the working hours. So we'll have a look at an example in a second, but you don't want to be heating at times when nobody's going to be there, obviously. So it is important to check those and to understand your heating system in general, understand what's being controlled by what and who is the person who can make those changes. Ideally, you don't want everybody to have the power to change your heating controls. This should be just down to either an energy team or a single person who has this as a responsibility. Otherwise you end up with somebody turning on the heating and someone turning on the air conditioning at the same time, which obviously isn't ideal. So check the times that are running. When we carry out Carbon Trust energy assessments, it's very rare that we would find a heating system in an organisation which is delivering heating at the right time. It's quite a simple thing to change. Check what sort of schedule, what working hours your staff are doing, when you will need heating, and have a look for the different opportunities. Another thing to think about would be if you have different areas of your organisation that are using heating, that are requiring heating in different ways. For example, there was a community building where on one floor there were offices which were used at sort of standard working hours, so 9 till 5:30 sort of thing, and on the second floor they had counselling rooms, and those counselling rooms, it worked out, were being heated at the same level as the offices, but they were only used for 2 hours a day, only on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but they were being heated to the same level, nice comfortable temperature for the whole week. So by just reducing that heating, only having it on for the days and times needed, that was a huge energy saving for a large area for that community organisation. And again, intermittent room use and meeting rooms is another one. So we have some meeting rooms in our offices, and we have a schedule, so you can have a look and see which rooms are booked for when. So if you're the person who's going to be changing the heating times, it's worth checking that if you know a room, for example, isn't going to be used all day, and you can isolate the heating in there. And again, checking who is the person who's going to be changing these settings. So that was times. This is temperature. Check that your thermostats are accurate and that they're measuring the actual temperatures. So something to check is whether your thermostats are being positioned poorly. For example, if they're right next to radiators, right next to windows or open doors, and that's not ideal. Other things, issues that you can have a look at in terms of temperature, are people opening the windows at the same time as air conditioning is being on? Are people using sort of personal fan heaters in different areas? A big one is equipment blocking heaters. You might end up with a radiator, massive stack of boxes in front of it, and that's completely blocking that heat. So it should definitely be looked at. And then make your adjustments. So you can have different thermostats for your room. You can also install radiator valves, so your different radiators can be heated to different temperatures in different rooms. The quote at the bottom, the statistic says that overheating can, by 1 degree centigrade, can increase consumption by 8%. So it is a really big potential energy saving just from 1 degree of overheating. And overheating by 3 to 4 degrees is not uncommon, so that is a huge increase in consumption if you are overheating your offices. So this is just a quick example where it's helpful to have a look at the building management system of this organisation. Now this would depend on the type of organisation you have, but for this office, they had sort of fairly standard hours for Monday to Friday week, and they're recording half-hourly data here on their energy usage for different areas of the business. Now, when they looked at the first week, so the first 5 spikes that you can see on the map, on the graph, you can see that in the evening times, on the dips, there was still quite a lot of energy being used. And when this was looked into, it worked out that there was an error in the building management system that meant that a lot of the pumps and the air conditioning systems were running throughout the night for no reason. So you can see after that weekend and then the next day, this completely reduced. That's a huge energy saving there every night and over the weekend, where it's down to very minimal compared to the daytime energy use. And this was equivalent to a saving of £8.5 thousand a year for this organisation. It's a huge saving. They didn't notice, any different. It was just an error in the building management system. So it's really important to be monitoring your data so you can notice things like this. Another example, this is an office with around 180 employees. The dotted line shows what the business was previously heating. So the heating was coming on at 6 AM and it was going off at 7:30 PM. However, people weren't using the office at those times. Nobody was coming in that early or staying that late, really. So they managed to just trim these heating timings by an hour in the morning. So they had the heating coming on at 7 AM. That still gave it enough time to heat up before anybody started coming into work. And they turned the heating off at 7 PM instead of 7:30. So it's only an hour difference in the morning and half an hour in the evening. But this accounted for a saving to the organisation of £4,000. So even something quite simple as that, and with no impact on the staff's comfort, just sort of out of hours heating, they had a saving there. So it's worth checking on your timings. Another thing to really make sure you have in place is this dead band. So as you can see from the thermometer scale at the bottom, you want to have a period in the middle where heating and cooling neither of them are on. This is to stop the fighting between the different systems. So if you have a dead band where you wait for the temperature to hit the lowest possible temperature before you start heating, and you wait until you reach the highest possible temperature before you start cooling. So in this example, for a typical office, that would be you wait until the temperature goes down to 19 degrees and then you put the heating on, and you wait until it reaches above 24 degrees, and that's when you can start with your air conditioning. So as long as you can keep your temperature between 19 degrees and 24 degrees, you won't be doing any heating or cooling, which is a big saving. And if you can keep within that band as much as possible, it does reduce costs because you're not having to increase the temperature from wildly oscillating between high and low temperatures. And it should ensure that people are more comfortable in the office as well, within that band of 5 degrees. So just a little recap on heating and some of the things that you can look at. Investing in energy efficient equipment. So if you do have really old and inefficient heating systems, it's worth having a look at replacing those. But before replacing them, as we mentioned further down, have a look at the boilers and pipework that you have. Make sure that it's properly maintained and being insulated as well. So if you're walking into your boiler room, for example, and you can feel that it's warm in the room, that means that a lot of heat has been wasted. It's not going where it should do. So that could benefit from some insulation. Control systems as well, and so making sure that you have things like that dead band period. Also, the timings of when your heating is going to go on and go off obviously depends on your organisation, your working hours. Considering a building energy management system, it's probably more useful for larger buildings, but it does give you ways to look at, for example, in that graph where you could see half-hourly data and you could see what the energy was being spent on. And if it's properly maintained building energy management system, then you can make sure that you're making the most savings that you can. And another thing just to have a look at is the filters on fans and ducts. So they should be replaced and cleaned properly. And we'll have a look in a second about the impact that can have on air conditioning units. So ventilation and air conditioning. So there's increasing need for or requirement of air conditioning in offices. This is partly because of there's more heat gains from more equipment, more people, more lighting in offices. So there needs to, they have to work harder to maintain the correct temperature for the office. But there are some simple and inexpensive ways that you can reduce energy consumptions from ventilation and air conditioning. So reducing the need, this can be by taking advantage of your natural ventilation and free cooling, so things like opening windows in the first instance before requiring air conditioning to kick in. Things like the picture here shows solar film, which can be placed over windows, and it stops so much thermal energy from the sun being pumped into a room, keeping it cooler, especially in sort of summer sunny days, and also just things like keeping blinds down if needed, especially over hot periods in summer. And for your equipment which might be pumping out heat, just making sure that the systems and the equipment is maintained properly, so it's staying efficient as possible, and not producing excess heat. So this shows the benefits of making sure that the air conditioning equipment is maintained properly. So if you can see on the graph, you have the blue line is when you're not really doing anything to your air conditioning, you're just waiting until it reduces in its performance so much until it breaks, and then you repair it, and then it breaks again after 8 years. If you compare that to the red line, this shows all the time you are carrying out preventative maintenance, so you're not waiting until it breaks, you're doing things proactively beforehand, and it shows that with proper maintenance, your system can last 15 years as opposed to 8 years. So you're getting an extra 7 years, and you're having a much better performance overall from that. The graph at the bottom as well shows the importance of filter cleanliness. So the filters clog up with dust, uses more energy. The red star shows that for a dirty filter system, that can be 30% extra energy use. So the energy use shown here goes between 0% and then an extra 12% if it's dirty, and an extra 30%. So if you're just cleaning those filters, you can come back down to the most optimum energy use as well. So office equipment is the next area. This graph just shows some of the typical areas of energy consumption in offices. So you can see heating is a large one, lighting is quite a large section, but ICT equipment is, I think, quite a surprisingly large chunk there. So it is really important to be having best practice in terms of how you're using that equipment. So simple things like turning off and powering down, making sure equipment is turned off when not in use. The more you can automate this, the better. So for example, printers can have default settings of when to shut down, how long to be active for, and you can also have controls that turn everything off that doesn't need to be on overnight and over the weekend. And this mentions as well printers in terms of, again, the default settings of being double-sided. This saves a lot of paper, and it does save energy as well, and encouraging people to print in batches. And again, minimizing the cooling load. So this goes back to what we mentioned with air conditioning, how equipment can be pumping out heat into your office and increase the need for air conditioning inside. If you're able to have your heat emitting equipment like printers and photocopiers in separate areas, ideally which are naturally ventilated with a good airflow, that'll reduce the need for air conditioning as well. So maintaining equipment, again, the printers and copiers should be checked and cleaned regularly. Raising awareness with your staff is an important one. We'll have a look at that a bit later. It's important to communicate what your policies are with your staff, so people know what should be switched off, what should be left on if it needs to be left on, what should be turned off at the end of the day, or just throughout the day if it's not being used. And this is relevant to lighting, computers and air conditioning units. 7-day timers, again, this is a fairly cheap alternative to managing energy efficiency. You can use it on multiple devices, and they can show you how much energy is being used, as well as time them to automatically switch off over the weekend. So this is just an example from our Carbon Trust Green Business Fund guide on office-based companies, which is worth checking out. Office equipment being left on standby over bank holidays and weekends over a year is typically could cost small and medium-sized offices nearly £6,000. So that's a huge saving just from having things not on standby over your bank holidays and your weekends. And the comparison between a typical office business and a more energy efficient office could be 65% more higher energy bill than the energy efficient one. So there are huge savings to be made, and there's a clear business case for doing so. Okay, so we'll have a look at some good housekeeping and people solutions here. So it's important to have the conversation with your staff. It's got to be a joint effort between your management and your employees. It won't work if just staff are interested in reducing energy efficiency and you don't have the buy-in from senior staff, and it also won't work if it's just a top-down initiative. So in terms of the conversation with any staff that you're managing, some of the benefits are environmental benefits, healthier and more productive working conditions and more comfortable for everybody, cost savings, and an enhanced corporate image, which may be important to your shareholders. Another thing to think about is what are your staff, what are they interested in? So not all people may necessarily care a lot about energy efficiency in terms of the environment and the cost savings, although they should. But for example, there was a police station where the people who were working in the police station didn't care so much about the energy efficiency of their office, but what they did care about was data security. So they had a lot of sensitive information, and when they were told that turning off your computers rather than just leaving them on standby is much better for data security, that saw a complete shift in behaviour. So that was really helpful way, with the added benefit of reducing energy costs. Another similar type of example was for hospitals. We worked with a hospital at some point, and the staff, the nurses in the hospital were keen on making sure that the patients were as comfortable as possible and had as much privacy as possible, especially overnight. So their new policy in terms of switching things off was focused on reducing sort of the light pollution and letting people sleep better if lights are off, unless they're absolutely necessary over the night, and keeping doors shut, which not only sort of reduced drafts and kept people at a comfortable temperature, but was also better for the privacy of the patients. So it's worth thinking about what your staff might particularly be interested in, and if there are sort of any added benefits or double wins there. So yeah, as we said, sort of identifying your key staff. Potentially there might be people who are already really interested in your organisation, who want to take things forward. It's definitely worth using those people and getting them to help out and help develop any policies that you put in place. Working out how is the best way to communicate with your staff. Making sure that you have senior management buy-in as well as staff buy-in at all levels, and continue to have feedback on what's the most effective measures in terms of what you're putting in place. So here are just some examples. Every organisation is different. Some of these might not work for you, but in terms of how you communicate and increase that engagement, you could run regular emails for awareness, and this could communicate what you're currently doing and what best practices to remind people. For example, if you notice that people are constantly leaving equipment on that shouldn't be on, or not switching off lights, is a good way to highlight that in emails. Quizzes and surveys. This is helpful just for increasing general knowledge, and also getting your staff involved to hear what their views are or any specific things that they might have noticed. Competitions is another good way. People love a competition. If you can somehow, if you have maybe different teams working in different areas, if you can have some sort of competition between them, if you can have notice that someone who always leaves their computer plugged in overnight and they don't turn it off, you could name and shame them maybe, or again, if you could have a reward for if somebody is always seem to be doing really well at energy efficiency in the office. The other thing is a notice board. The notice board could have the same type of information that would be in your email. Workshops, so you could have a specific drop-in session for all of your staff, or for just your energy related staff, so people who will be doing your energy management. Green champions, so highlighting anybody who is really keen in general and wants to go beyond their job description to help reduce the company's impact. As I mentioned, if someone is really keen, it's worth using that drive and maybe giving them some responsibility to run a specific project or policy. And then team meetings, especially for larger organisations, it can be helpful to drop in on team meetings just to explain and promote what's best practice and see if there are specific energy saving initiatives that have been put in place already, and if not, sort of promoting what is coming up. Okay, so now we'll have a look at the next steps. So here are some technical energy saving actions. If your organisation does have a server room, often these are really cold, so they're cooled a lot because IT teams tend to be worried about the performance of equipment when it's too hot. However, most IT equipment nowadays doesn't need to be kept that cold. Typically, they're really overcooled. If you can reduce this cooling even a little bit, you might get some pushback from your IT team, but try and reduce it just by a couple of degrees so you're not keeping it so cold. See if there are any issues with your technical equipment, and if not, you can keep increasing that temperature. Insulation, this can improve staff comfort. Yep, so it can be a fairly inexpensive way of increasing the efficiency of, specifically for boilers and any uncovered pipes. Timings on your heating, ventilation and air conditioning systems. So as we mentioned, the example where the office was being heated from 6 AM until 7:30 at night, didn't need to be heated for all of that time. Make sure that the timings are suitable for your organisation. Timings again on any equipment. The example here is zip taps. So in our office we have instant hot water for cups of tea and coffee. These are small boilers. You need to make sure that they're not just going to be churning overnight and are properly timed for when people are likely to need them. Building management system, if you have one, it should be set up correctly. You want to be monitoring it and checking that there are no irregularities. So there's no point having a building management system if you're not monitoring it and if you're not checking that it's working in the way it should be. And putting timers and controls on any equipment that you have, so you can switch off automatically outside of the working hours. So some of the next steps to have a look at. The first one being understanding your energy use. So having a look at your office, carry out a walk around. This is helpful for checking things like where the thermostats are being positioned in the right place, whether there are boxes in front of your radiators, whether windows are being left open when they shouldn't be, and also check the condition and operation of your equipment. So number 2, identify your opportunities. So once you've understood your energy use, you should be able to focus on the best opportunities for your organisation, and compile an energy checklist. In terms of when you're prioritising your actions for step number 3, it's important to have a plan of not only when you're going to implement any changes, but also who's going to be responsible for this, and who's going to be responsible for measuring the savings. I was going to jump to step 5. Step 4 being seeking specialist help. So you might be able to do most things in-house, but if you do need more specialist help for complex options, specifically if it's sort of technical issues, it's worth exploring that. And then measuring the savings, as I mentioned. So once you have implemented either a policy like a switch off policy, or if you've made a change to your controls or your lighting has been replaced, it's worth having a look at what has been changed compared to the original energy consumption figures, to check if it's made a difference and what that difference is. And it's really helpful, especially if this has been successful, to communicate this, whether it's in your emails that you're sending around, or the ways that you're communicating with your staff about the office's energy efficiency. And then step 6 is just to continue to enforce your policies and systems. There's no point having a big push for 1 week on a certain behaviour change campaign if you then sort of forget about it, and people can easily sort of get bored after a week. So keep mixing things up, trying different things if something's not working. So in terms of what's available, this slide just has some examples of some of the free guides that you may be interested in having a look at for more specific information on either different sectors. So we have guides for the hospitality sector, retail, as well as office-based companies, which is probably the most relevant one for today. But we also have specific ones for things like refrigeration. We have the lighting guide. We've got a fairly new guide on electric and smart vehicles, and also some general guides which are proving popular, including the Better Business Guide to Energy Saving, our guide on renewable energy sources, and our guide on carbon footprinting if you're interested in carbon footprinting your organisation or working to become carbon neutral even. These are available to download on the Carbon Trust website if you go to carbontrust.com/greenbusiness. We also have free tools available. So there's 3 tools currently. The first one is a tool helping you measure your carbon footprint for your organisation. The second tool is for benchmarking your energy use compared to others in your sector. So you put in information including how big your site is and what you're spending, how much energy you're spending, and this can help you to have a look at how you're doing compared to other organisations. And then step 3 is a helpful tool specifically for lighting. So if you know the type of lighting that you have at the moment, it can help you build the business case for making upgrades to LEDs. You can work out how much you would save over certain years of time frame, and it can help you work out whether it's worth it for your organisation. We also have the Green Business Directory. So we have a Carbon Trust accredited supplier scheme where we've independently verified suppliers of different technologies. So if you can see in the picture, there's various areas including controls, efficient IT equipment, heating, ventilation and air conditioning, insulation, lighting, all these different areas. You can go to the website and filter down the side and look for who's in your area. So you can search for suppliers, and then you can reach out to them for specific projects. There's also the energy technology list, which some of you may have heard of. It's a government run list which we manage on behalf of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. It shows the top 25% in terms of energy efficiency of different products in different technology categories. So for example, areas like refrigeration, boilers, motors and drives, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. So if a product is on the list, you may be able to claim enhanced capital allowance if you're an organisation that pays income tax or corporation tax. So this would just be when you're completing your tax returns at the end of the year. You have until April 2020 to complete that, but the energy technology list itself will still be continuing, and it's just a useful way to check if a product that you want to buy is among the most energy efficient. Quick note to say is that lighting is not on the energy technology list because there are just so many different variations of different types of lighting bulbs, but you can check with the manufacturer if the lighting meets the criteria of the energy technology list, and if it does, then it doesn't need to specifically be on the list. You can still claim your ECA, enhanced capital allowance, towards the cost of that lighting. We'll send the slides around. This page has just some links of helpful flyers and further information if you're either a manufacturer or a purchaser of any energy efficient equipment, and some links to the website as well. Okay, so now we have time for questions. I will just give you a few moments to type in any more questions that you have, and then I'll do my best to answer them in a second. Thank you. Okay, thanks for your questions. We've had quite a few, so I'll do my best to get through some of them. So one of the questions was, if you don't own a building, is there a way to get your landlords to install energy efficiency measures? This obviously depends on your organisation, but if the landlord is the one paying the energy bills, it's a good idea to help build the business case for them. So for example, if it was replacing lighting, you can use things like the carbon chest lighting tool to show to the landlords this is what the savings could be made for our organisation. It's also worth just having the conversation with them to see if they are planning any changes already, if there's anything in particular they may not have thought of, but you might have thought of. So it is just worth sort of opening up that conversation. In terms of things that you can do yourself, obviously a lot of the sort of behavior change things and switch off policies, things like that you can do obviously on your own, and in terms of any of the equipment that you own in the building that isn't the buildings, it's just your own equipment, and they're the sort of things that you have control over yourself. We had another question with somebody who asks, what would be your recommended approach when doing environmental reporting for multiple offices in different countries and different cities? This really depends on what your reporting is for. So if it's just if it's mandatory reporting for larger organizations, or if it's reporting just internally for yourselves, measuring and monitoring your energy usage. If obviously different sites, especially in different countries, are going to be quite different, but if you can have at least some kind of standard way of measuring, that can be really helpful. And just sort of as much data as you have is helpful for each separate site to have either a specific energy team or a specific person who is the either green champion or energy manager, whatever it is, and then having maybe regular Skype meetings or phone calls between those different people to just to talk about how the different sites are doing. And also that's quite a nice example of the kind of thing where you can run a little mini competition maybe over a month to see if the different offices and the different sites can make some changes, see who is the most reducing them by the most percentage, for example. So there was another question. This is slightly similar to what we mentioned before about making the business case for landlords. And they say they occupy a floor of a building, which means they don't have access to make the changes for the boiler. And again, I'd say two things: focus on what you can change, even if it's sort of smaller areas that you might have more control over. But also having that conversation with the landlord, seeing what they're already having plans. They might just not have thought of things, or they might be too reticent to make cost investments. It's also worth, if you're in a shared organisation, a shared building with different organisations, see if you can sort of band together to talk to the landlord together, especially if it's going to be a change that would impact all the people who are working in the office. We had another question that says, will the slides be available after the presentation? And that will be helpful for making the business case to senior management. Yes, everyone who has signed up today will get the slides sent round to you, and you'll also have the link to watch it on YouTube if you need to go back to any specific sections. This will be sent round in the next few days, so don't worry about that. Probably just got time for a couple more. If we can focus on one of these things, is there a top priority area? If I can sort of fudge this answer and say two things, I would say in terms of technology, the biggest saving, if you can make an investment, would be changing, depending on the type of lighting that you have, changing your lighting to LED. That's typically the first thing that businesses want to do in terms of energy efficiency, just because it does have such a quick payback period and can make such a difference. The other thing that I would say is energy management. These kinds of things are often free, making sure that really significant savings can be made just from simple things like making sure everything is being controlled properly and heated at the right times, heated to the right temperature, for example, when you're thinking about heating, and you're switching off things when they're not in use, particularly for IT equipment. So that would be my sort of two areas. I guess that would be the one if you don't have any money, either the money to replace the lighting with LED up front, or if you don't have the control, for example, if you're in a shared building, or if you're not the owner of the building. In terms of, we had a question about the deadband on thermostats. Someone said, does a deadband on thermostats not depend on the energy efficiency of the building itself? So deadband wouldn't really change. The main thing that would change would be the speed at which a building cools down or heats up. So ideally, you can, it's sort of more theoretical that you should be keeping your heating shouldn't come on until it's too cold, and your air conditioning shouldn't come on until it's too hot. The temperatures that you set are up to you. We would recommend between 19 and 24 degrees for a standard office. Obviously, in terms of the building itself, would impact on how you make those changes, so what sort of controls you have installed. Obviously that changes slightly with the business efficiency, but the deadband itself still stands. That's the same for any business, for any type of building. Someone else said, what approach do you suggest for organisations who share office spaces? This is similar for if you're an organisation in a building, you don't own the building, or it's owned by a landlord. Again, just have some kind of meeting with all the other organisations who share the space, if that's possible. If you already have meetings regularly with the other people in the building, it's something to raise. The more you can work together on these kinds of things, the more successful it's likely to be. And again, if you have limited control over the building itself, implementing those sort of behaviour changes with your own staff and the other staff who are sharing your office space with you is really important. So you could have for example, one member of each organisation who's sharing the same space could be the sort of representative in terms of energy or efficiency. And if you can get people to to meet on a regular basis or have a sort of communication that you're sending out regularly to all the staff, that's really helpful as well. Someone says, do you know if you can get insulation to stick on windows and make them keep in heat a little? The thing I would mention for that would be the solar film. So that's specifically for stopping so much heat coming in from the sun on hot days, but it should also work in the same way in terms of keeping the heat in the building as well. So it stops reflection as well, which is helpful just for people's, glare on the screens. But it can be insulation as well. That's a good idea. Yeah, someone else who said that their office is a managed building, they can't make any structural changes, and we've sort of covered that. There's a question that says, would an office still benefit from switching lights to LED, even if none of the lights are incandescent? Probably most are halogen tube lighting. Yes, there would still be a benefit. I'd recommend using the tool for that one. You can put in the exact types of models of lights and how many you have in your organization into the tool, and it will work out for you how beneficial it will be. So in terms of cost savings and in terms of how much energy you'll be saving as well. So it's worth checking with the tool, but in general, LED is the most efficient. So if you can make the change, obviously the sort of oldest lighting that you have should be replaced first, or the lighting that's being used the most. But yeah, I'd recommend having a look at the tool. Again, you can find that at carbontrust.com/green business, and if you find the section on tools, have a look at that. Okay, we've hit 12 o'clock, so I will leave it there. If anybody has any further questions, or for anyone whose questions we didn't get around to fully answering, you can contact me directly at greenbusiness@carbontrust.com, and I will be sending around the slides in the next couple of days, so you can reply to that email as well. Thank you everybody for joining today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope you found that useful. Thank you, bye.